It's immediately on top of yesterday's gospel, which was the feeding of the 5,000. And it says very clearly that Jesus sends the disciples away, leaving him alone with the crowds. And then he dismisses the crowds. And what does he do? He goes to pray. I think that's significant. It raises one question. Well, why did Jesus need to pray? He's God. Why did he need to pray? What was going on in Jesus' prayer? I think it was a time for him to recognize his presence and gifts with the Lord, to be with his Father, to be with his Spirit, and to be refreshed. And if God's very self needs prayer, how much more do we need it? So I think it's an invitation for us to recognize in all of our activities and in everything that we do, we should be people of prayer. And we should make time specifically for that. If Jesus makes time in his ministry specifically to be alone, to be in prayer, then surely in modeling our desire to be like Jesus, we should want to do the same. To be people of prayer. And it is there we'll find the deepest desires of our hearts and find and encounter God, and then be empowered and refreshed to go forward. Secondly, obviously the disciples are in the boat, and they're out on the sea, and the wind is tossing them about, and Jesus comes walking to them on the water. And they think it's a ghost. They don't recognize him. I think that's a second key insight for us. How often don't we recognize God? I think it's too easy for us to write it off and say, well, that was just luck. That was great luck. Or, isn't that interesting? Or, this happened by chance. Well, we should really recognize it's none of those. It's grace. God's grace abounds. But we don't name it as grace, and we don't see it as grace. So then it makes it hard to find God in our lives. Many of the kids that I work with at Lael Lake, they'll tell me all the time, well, if I could just see God in my life, and I know what to do then. And my argument is that you can. And God is telling you what to do. It's just a matter of us coming to clarity to be able to do that. So to recognize that, and to carpe gratia, seize the grace. Perhaps you've heard the phrase carpe diem, seize the day. But today is about carpe gratia, seize the grace. What is the grace being offered to you today? It's not nothing. It's not insignificant. It's the essence of our Christian lives. Be seized by that grace. The last point, of course, that is interesting, obviously, is that Peter goes out of the boat. So he goes out of his comfort zone. And we're being invited all the time to do that by God. To reach beyond, to go forward, follow the Lord. And of course, Peter gets scared because there's winds. It doesn't work out the way it's supposed to. Well, gee, it didn't necessarily work out the way it was supposed to for lots of us. It's not what I expected. Okay, it's not what you expected. I didn't expect to be teaching online for a month. It's not what I expected. But that doesn't mean there's still not possibilities to seize that grace. And when it gets tough and the winds blow, we can call out to Jesus to save us. And the word that strikes me most in my prayer is immediately. Immediately. So there's no hesitation. There's no thought. Jesus grabs Peter. And immediately God, in our need, grabs us. To save us. To keep us from drowning. To invite us into deeper relationship with him and with the church. So be open to discovering what God is doing in your life. Through the power of prayer. Through the power of grace. And then never fear to tread out